Hello, everyone, and welcome to Hit the Limit Break podcast, the podcast that steps away from the daily news cycle of the gaming industry to look at the bigger picture, that tries to piece the puzzle together of gaming's future by talking to those that are designing the puzzle pieces. Today, I am joined by Strange Scaffold's Xalavier Nelson. Xalavier, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great.
Fantastic. Now, before we jump into some specific questions about you and Strange Scaffold and everything you guys have got going on, I wanted to ask you just 5 questions that we're going to be asking every guest. So the first one is, outside of the most obvious answers, what to you is surprisingly the most different thing about the gaming industry now comparative to when you first joined it?
The number of things a single game does are deeply, expanded. Mm-hmm. And there has been both not much tooling to accommodate that or make that easier. It's just more stuff people have to do.
Sure.
And not much acknowledgement of it. So I love going back to the PS2 era in particular. The 6th gen, I think, is the sweet spot of game design and aesthetics for a variety of reasons. And I noticed that a lot of those games don't have subtitles. And as far as I know, at least, I think subtitles might have been a mandatory requirement when you started to hit the Xbox 360 era. Or at the very least, it was such a massive trend in the industry that everyone started to follow that with that multimedia high-definition push. Which means subtitles, one of the core tenets of how we experience things in our Netflix-using world, just weren't
a thing
standard to games. And I didn't realize that growing up because in an RPG, they'd usually have the text on screen, right? Knights of the Old Republic. Or I just dealt with it. And I didn't realize going back over time, subtitles just became a thing, and Unity doesn't provide subtitles out of the box. You have to build your own subtitle system. You have to hook that into your localization. Unreal, to a degree, does provide localization and subtitles built in, but you still have to display that. Sometimes in the more characterful the way you display it, the more custom your solution has to be, which is more development work. Mm-hmm. So, as opposed to when I was coming up both as a kid as well as a game developer, cross-play multiplayer. I love cross-play multiplayer. I'm so glad that that's a thing, that it's so widespread.
Yeah.
But also, we as a medium do not tend to acknowledge the cost of the massive innovations and amount of work and so-called standards that now form so much of our experience. When you're making, say, a 2-week-long video game, and you're making sure you have Steam achievements in, that's additional dev time.
Of course.
And the more of those little things that you've got, a 2-week game becomes a 1-month game, becomes a 3-month game. At that point, why not make it 9 months for additional polish? And pretty soon you've spent 3 years on a magnum opus about clicking for the distressing masked man sitting in the corner of your hotel room. This is the common arc of game development.
Yeah, and it's interesting to think about that in the context of the fact that dev cycles just seem to be coming longer, especially on the AAA front. And, I think a lot of people chalk it up just to, the graphics are so much better. It just takes so much more time to polish. Or there are these gameplay systems that need to feel more detailed. But then there's simple...
I remember when the same game wouldn't come out, even on the same, PS2 would have a different game.
Yeah.
A straight-up different game than GameCube or Xbox.
Yeah.
And now we have multi-platform release date ships. I remember waiting several years for a Yakuza game to come from Japan.
Yeah.
We live in an age of miracles, and we don't call it an age of miracles. And I think that's creating an increasingly large disconnect between developers and their audience.
Well, that information, I think, is something that will be news to a lot of people, and hopefully will kind of give people a lot more context as to why these games, ultimately will get delays, or, just kind of no one wants to talk about their game yet 'cause it's just not ready to be talked about. Thinking about those little details like that, crazy to think that subtitles isn't even a standard baked into the into the developer tools today. It's wild. Okay, next question. So obviously, I'm sure, you spend a lot of time developing games. I'm sure you also obviously spend a lot of time playing games. If you were not in the gaming industry, how would you be spending your time?
I would be walking directly into the sea, as is every man's quest and purpose. And I mean every man in the sense of all of mankind. I think every person is kind of just waiting out their time until they no longer have it in themselves to resist the call to the sea. I know I am. Directly into it one step at a time until they inevitably drown at its bottom. So I think I'd be walking directly into the sea, or I'd be a children's librarian. That's what I was doing. Oh, okay. Games.
Maybe you could have the library like right next to the ocean, so when the time comes, it's just, it's a short trip.
If the kids saw me get up during story time and walk directly into the sea, they would be tempted to follow the call themselves. I know. And pretty soon, my legacy becomes the Pied Piper of drowning children. Exactly. And I don't want to be known for that.
So thank God games exist to save you from this.
Thank God.
From this existence. Okay, of all the game, obviously very busy with dev time, but hopefully you've played some more recent releases. It doesn't necessarily even need to be a recent release, but is there a game that you've played recently that you haven't worked on yourself that you think is indicative of gaming's future, that has something that kind of shows you the promise of where games are going in the next 5 to 10 years?
Final Fantasy Origin Strangers of Paradise, which is
hell yeah,
juicy and delicious in ways that games, again, don't really get to be since the 6th gen. It is miraculous in terms of how polished it is in very specific ways, and the other ways it is jank because it doesn't need to be like good or grand or provide an entire other gameplay tenet there. And that idea of focus, especially on a AAA scale, is something that a lot of people are scared to honestly provide.
If there was one game that you could wipe from your memory so you could play it fresh, what would it be? And you can't say Final Fantasy Origins.
Maybe Bloodborne.
Oh, yeah, hell yeah.
Bloodborne and specific moments of Bloodborne, that or Resident Evil 7. There's moments in that game that even if I replay it, I'll never be able to get those again, and they so shook me as a person that they have permanently affected my design and storytelling sensibilities. Oh. So if I could go back to, and I could say that for even say things like Portal 2, right? I think Portal is an example a lot of people have. I think Resident Evil 7 or Bloodborne, if they would change me in different ways now because I would be living in the timeline in which I hadn't experienced them, and that's a beautiful thing to me. And I wanna go back. I want to go back to Yharnam.
We have to go back. Those are two excellent choices, and I both have. One of my most formative gaming memories is beating Bloodborne. It was the very first Souls-like I ever beat in college. I just remember for like a week being stoned as hell playing that game, and like literally jumped in the air and had my friend catch me when I beat the game. I will never forget that. And Resident Evil 7 is one that and then Resident Evil 7 is actually one I completed years later after it came out in preparation for Village, actually. And I was like, yep, people were right. This is one of the greatest horror games ever made. So yeah, those are both excellent choices.
Bloodborne, go ahead.
Yeah.
Anecdote about Bloodborne, but Bloodborne, I had heard so much of its difficulty that because of confusion about the UI, I didn't know that the weapon I had picked. I saw that I got to pick a weapon. Yeah. And I was returned to the world and I got to fight a werewolf, but I didn't know that you had to equip that weapon because I didn't know how the inventory screen works for the game. It's a little bit obtuse. So I was like, oh, you tricky dogs. You showed me the weapon I could have later, but I have to earn it. So I ended up having a pretty easy, being a relative term. I had a pretty easy time with the rest of the game because I beat the entire first zone with just my fists because I thought that was the call that Bloodborne was forcing me to rise to. Before I realized, I just didn't understand how the inventory screen worked. You just put it in your right hand.
That's pretty incredible. I mean, how many hours did that? Like, how many attempts did that take you to get through that with just your fists?
I managed to get up to the boss room in about 5 times.
Wow.
I played cautiously. It was pretty adorable. And then I was like, oh shoot, it's so much easier with the gun.
Is this the most tumultuous time in video game history, in your opinion? And not just this moment, but like the last couple of years we've been experiencing of layoffs and studio closures and leaks, however you want to kind of pass it.
Yeah, I think it's easy to forget, especially in the moment, the lessons or the pains of the past. I remember the war against pre-owned games. I remember
sure
the
many died in that war. So many
but
lives.
Suddenly you had games that came out that would have the one-time use codes inside the game that would give you access to, say, even multiplayer. Couldn't play multiplayer without the code. I remember there was because you had the war against pre-owned games. There's been a lot of like pivotal moments in game history, like when you had to add multiplayer to everything. The introduction in a really real way of like a standardization of the gaming landscape where Sega died. I remember Sega dying and changing form, and the basically 3 console manufacturers getting codified in real time, and how that seemed to, in a very minute and specific sense, determine the future. The death of the Vita. I'm showing my age with a lot of the things I select, but changes in the arcade business, changes in buying habits, and the production and conditions under which you make games has been tumultuous throughout the medium's history.
Yeah.
But genuinely, in all of my research and in all of my time working here, experiencing the medium inside and outside of its walls, there's nothing quite like this time, and there's no logic that unifies the decisions being made right now, which is what scares the most intelligent people that I know. And when I see those people scared, that's when I get really worried.
Yeah.
Specifically, pre-owned games took a bite out of people's bottom lines in a way that they reacted to, cause and effect. The Dreamcast, you have a clear set of factors that resulted in that. Long live the Dreamcast in our hearts. There is, for almost every pivotal point in games, one or several factors you can point to and say, this is what caused it. What's happening now, you all still have a lot of factors, but it's driving both really wide-ranging decisions as well as deeply confusing ones. Like, I'm speaking about not a lack of intelligence, but a specific lack of connecting logic, where I am seeing and hearing about publishers canceling finished games.
Right.
Finished games. Games that are ready to go out, or that are this close to being there, because of a fear that the game will not be worth putting it on the Steam store. Like the media landscape and where it's at now, you can't just say, it's all for tax write-offs, because at a certain point you aren't generating profit. Like, the tax write-off only covers your tax.
Right.
To a degree.
Yeah.
So, I am saying that right now, one of the things that's scary about games in the moment that we're in, it isn't just that the layoffs, it isn't just the way players' experiences are being impacted. It's also the fact that what's coming out of that environment is decisions being made without clear logic behind them, influenced by the factors around us. It's just fear or gambling mentality or whatever the case might be on an individual basis. And that means that there is no clear avenue of safety.
Mm-hmm.
There is no like, oh, all the money is in VR, so you go to VR right now, or all of the fears are around, I don't know, purchasing habits of kids 13 to 18, so all of the games that are getting made are now M-rated now to try to avoid that market group. We don't know. And in many cases, we can't know. And that's terrifying as hell.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it, and it makes you. I'm sure it just compounds the fear, right? That's at the heart of a lot of these decisions, and the more decisions like this get made, the more it feeds into the fear, which is cyclical in its own way, right? Of this compounding kind of breakdown almost of the industry in a way. I mean, I think it is the most tumultuous time in gaming, but there are certainly others as well that people we've recorded with have mentioned. But yeah, it's that lack of logic behind decisions speaks to it pretty aptly, I think. Well, thank you for answering those questions. We're going to jump into some more specifics with you and your career. So I know that before you got into game development, which you are, very well known for now, you were a gaming journalist for quite a number of years. And I'm just curious as to if you can speak to your kind of, now that you're on the other side of it and you're in game development, what is your relationship with games journalism now? Does it feel like you have some kind of intuition maybe on that side of things because you were in that world for so long? Or are you, however you want to kind of answer that, I guess?
There are ways I can understand the needs of a journalist because I was on that side of the fence for a while. So, ability to hold that perspective in my mind has been valuable, especially thinking about what is a way of talking about this game that gets people to care. Mm-hmm. Not just abstractly, but because I used to be one of those people finding things that would make me care. That's been useful. I'd say the main thing for my relationship with games journalism is this more bittersweet thing of realizing from the outside looking in now the cycle. Because the way it tends to go is someone starts as a games journalist, Enthusiast Press moves on to say something like PC Gamer or IGN or Polygon or what have you. And then there's three paths. You have independent creation, where they'll have a Patreon or whatever is their audience. Mm-hmm. They go into PR.
Yep.
Or they go into game development. And seeing every promising, really strong games journalist with a really clear perspective, they're speaking to people, they are fulfilling the role of what we consider press to be in the medium. When you have almost every single one of those people, like clockwork, hit that track within a few years, and it's like, oh yeah, we used to work together at PC Gamer. Oh yeah, I used to read your stuff in Edge. Whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
It's always cool to see them find the best route for them, but it's bittersweet in the sense of even I would have stayed on the journalism side of the fence if I had seen a road for creative personal fulfillment as well as being able to provide for a family that journalism, especially over time, doesn't seem to provide.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw a really interesting tweet, I think, when one media company was getting layoffs. It just comes to my mind every time a media company has layoffs. But, someone was talking about that track of sharing out hey, we have PR positions open with our agency for those affected. And someone retweeted it and was like, it's great that, there can be other avenues for game journalists, but like we need good, strong and great writers to send these PR beats to, right? Like we can't just have all the journalists transfer and become PR, because like there's the other end of the equation there that needs to be balanced. And so it's
you need that counterbalance for the ecosystem, right?
Exactly. And it seems in many ways it's also being filled by those people, influencers and people that are some people who are not necessarily holding themselves to a standard that are more strict members of the press. I'm not necessarily saying you need a degree in journalism, but I don't have a degree in journalism. I did take one journalism class, but there's rules and kind of standards that I kind of try and hold myself to when I'm working on specific pieces, and that seems to be eroding a lot as well. So I mean, it does seem to keep following that path, and it would be nice for there to be some kind of long-term solution for people to have that sustained career. And we'll see where that nets out. We'll see where I'm at. Maybe I in a couple of years, come over to the other side myself. But it's certainly will be interesting to see that develop. Okay, so you're in the game development world now. You have this developer, Strange Scaffold. You guys pump out a bunch of games. It's quite a young studio, but you have a number of games out. You've got a number of games coming out. And, I've read up about the kind of I think you might have described it this way, but it's been described as a constellation model for Strange Scaffold. So if you could just quickly kind of speak to that for people that might not be familiar with what that means before we kind of dissect.
Basically, the idea is a lot of, especially on the indie side of games, failure points come from the idea that if anything happens to one of the three best friends making the coolest indie game ever, the entire project falls apart. There is no support, there is no second chances, and people have to postpone their lives or work under self-imposed or externally imposed desperate conditions to make the game come out. So the idea of a constellation model where you basically build an artistic community where if one of the things that occurred on a Strange Scaffold game was we had someone who went through, their family went through a grievous illness. Mm-hmm. They had to step back from the project because we've got another animator in the wings. No one is a replaceable cog, but we have the ability to provide support for stepping into that role or replacing it. It would never be the same. And we explicitly make that clear, but saying, hey, you step away for your life, the project will go on, you're still going to be credited, we will still pay you for the work that you've done, and if you have the space to come back, we'll still actively look for a place for you on this project to put more of your voice in it. I had never seen anything like that in games, and it struck me that the asset-based nature of games, where it's a piece of art here, a piece of writing there, would be useful for having more modular input, stone soup style, from a wide variety of people to build precise things in precise ways. I was told it was not possible. We've now been doing it for 5 years. That as of 2 weeks from now, we'll have been done it across 15 games. So I think we've proven it's possible.
It's certainly interesting and certainly seems to be working. I know I read in an interview that every game that you guys have put out has been profitable, which is awesome.
Not everyone, but it's been close.
Close. Well, I'm sure that it's made up maybe in certain titles and things like that. I don't know. I do have questions about the financials in a bit, but you talking about like this model being something that you were being told wasn't possible. While I'm hesitant to like throw around kind of markers like Triple A, indie, things like this, because I think those lines are becoming more and more blurred as we progress in games. But, I would say the stuff that you guys make has the indie nature, right? And you are not beholden to any additional publisher. Maybe you're getting finances from something, I don't know. But do you think that this model can be adapted on a larger scale for a bigger studio that is working on a AAA title? And does it require, because I know it's all like mostly contract work, is there any way to make it work with like salaried positions, or is it kind of at the behest of like it needs to be small, otherwise it just like breaks down?
I mean, even if it wasn't me doing it, the shape of the studio would have to be different. And that's one of the big things that I try to pass on when people ask me about starting their own studios, because especially in this time with all this stuff happening, I get contacted about this a lot, because I'm seen, among other things, to be a guy who ships and who survives. And the thing I tell people is you have to adapt the machine to who you are as a person as well. I am neurodivergent. I can't just be in a room with one grand magnum opus for 5 years. I need to be working on multiple things at a time. So I build a studio structured such that people can pop in and out on different projects at a different time, and it moves with that flexibility and with that, frankly, amount of movement that it keeps my brain actually more calm than if I was just, quote unquote, focusing on one project. Other people I know who have asked me this question, I'm like, don't start a studio like Strange Scaffold, because you want to sit in a room for 3 years with one concept. You can build an entire structure to make that sustainable for you and your partners, but you need to build around who you are rather than echoing. And I think, talking about scale, I've now worked in AAA. I've now worked in leading positions on AAA. And the core things I'm talking about, which are make decisions that make the game ship, that make the game quality for your players, and that make sure that devs don't die in the process so they can serve their players. Those things, the exact format of Strange Scaffold, it's highly individual because I think it needs to be. But the overall principles of ship your games, survive to ship your next one, I was again also told that those don't scale to AAA and beyond. And now I've done that in other places. So either I don't exist, I am in a Matrix-style simulacrum accomplishing my dreams.
Right.
Or a lot of the assumptions we make about how we make video games and what is necessary to make video games and the pains that are necessary to make a video game, those may be erroneous.
So speaking on kind of that similar wavelength a little bit, it seems that a lot of developers are as you say, like, and it's actually funny because I went on a developer, I checked out, I went to Raccoon Logic, who are the old Typhoon Studios team who are making Revenge of the Savage Planet, and they're talking about how for them, like, shipping a game is like a big marker. Like, they actively think about, we need to get this out the door, and it seems a lot of developers struggle with, getting to that point and just kind of being stuck in this, development hell, for lack of a better word, for a long time. And as you say, your model really exists because of who you are as a person, and you make that model work for the games you make and the person you are, and not necessarily something that can just be adapted. But are there any blanket ideas you have for where you are seeing developers kind of consistently stumbling, and like what mistakes a lot of developers are making, and kind of like what you think almost like the a blanket fix, if developers could just do this one thing, would be like
one easy trick that doctors don't want you to know?
Exactly. Yeah.
These situations are so complex. I'd first off say, like, I would never be so arrogant as to say that if you just do this, your project will come out or your studio will be saved, because I know a lot of people who during this time did those things, and they still, by the industry, by the vagaries of fate, by whatever the case may be, they still got kicked in the chest and weren't able to finish the project. One thing that I think greatly facilitates the completion of a project, though, is, for lack of a better term, when you're given a time and a budget, you're defining the project by those things. We know when you make a $150 million movie in Hollywood that you're making a different fundamental thing than a $3 million thing.
Mm-hmm.
And in games, we see it almost as a linear scale, especially on the business development side, where it's like, oh, if we give you $3 million to make your $300,000 game, then it's just a better version of that game, right?
Right.
No. When you expand that timeline by 2 years, you're making a different project. And I would love if you paid someone $3 million to make the $300,000 game, but that's not what you're doing. You're adding cross-play multiplayer. You're adding a full story campaign that they weren't planning to build now. And now that they have a full story campaign, you need to restructure the rest of the project around that, including your timelines. If you have full voice acting in your game, that means you need to have time to write the script, have it recorded by all actors, have all of those things get edited, approved, put them in the project, find where they go wrong, bring the people in ideally to record one more time for pickups and for other issues we find, and then you move forward. And the number of times I tell you that either things do not get brought into that accounting of what goes into your game, where it's like, oh yeah, we got additional funding from the publisher, so we're just going to add voice acting. It's like, well, did you include the 2 months of prep time that adds here, and here? No? You're probably going to delay your game, buddy. You might not ship it.
Yeah.
It's stuff like that I think is important and is a big piece of the Strange Scaffold philosophy. We talked about this with Clickholding, where it was a 2-month game made for about $25,000, and every decision around that game was, this game has to come out in 2 months. What's the best thing we deliver for players in this time? And I think right now in this industry, there's a lot of wishful thinking, as well as, if I'm being blunt, a lack of full accounting, because these are very intelligent people making these decisions. But when I'm brought into the room on certain projects, I say, hey, so this new feature you've included, what's it going to take to test that and build that? And will it work with the rest of this? And blah, 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 blah. And we walk together through the implications of an upcoming decision. And I say, that doesn't make much sense, does it? And I was like, no. And that self-interrogation is not a significant piece of the game development process from what I've seen working on about 100 games from indie to AAA. There is so much that in the production of a video game is not fully absorbed, categorized, and used as the definition point for what is being made in the first place. And so you see games go over time and over budget again and again. No one knows when anything is going to come out. The publishers get skittish. They start canceling things. And it creates this self-fulfilling prophecy that no one knows when a game is going to come out, how good it's going to be, and whether it will sell enough copies to survive. And there's a lot of those variables you can't control. But your time and your budget, what the project is, those are things you can know up front. Those are things you can determine around. And it's one thing I would recommend to anyone who's especially looking at starting their own studio in this time. If you want the key to surviving, looking at anyone else who has survived for a significant amount of time, it's stuff like that. It's looking at what you've got in your hands and figuring out how you deliver something great with that, because there is nothing more than that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that honestly, that speaks to a lot of what I was talking about with those devs working on the Savage Planet sequel. They mentioned that they initially, when they were working on the first game, they were getting budgets that were way bigger than they were anticipating to spend. They were getting offers from like Microsoft, because I think Microsoft was, did some finance on the project and stuff. And, Microsoft wanted to offer them more money than they were asking for. And they basically were like, no, that makes the game like we are making this game for this, and this is the vision within these parameters, and we know what the game looks like with this amount of money. And if you offer us this, like as great as that is, as you said, you're not just giving us more money to have more money. You're expecting this game to now transform into something that is tenfold bigger, and,
while also being the exact same focus as the small thing, and that just isn't the case. If you're making a Suicide Squad, which had so many talented people working on it, a live service AAA looter shooter is not going to have the exact same shared DNA and goals and construction and things it's offering players as a AAA cinematic story-based, and especially in the latter games, open world AAA adventure.
Yeah.
It's just not, and they're treated like adjacent things when they're actually, it's the difference between a fruit and a computer. There's you're taking totally different forms of matter and saying that, but they're both still made of matter, right? It's like atoms at the end of the day.
Sure.
No, it's not.
You mentioned the movie industry in, talking about, the financial kind of aspects of game development, and now you are in some ways a part of it because one of your games is being adapted into a full-fledged movie, El Paso Elsewhere. I believe Lionsgate, is that correct? Lionsgate picked it up? Was that the studio?
No, it was D. Bonaventura Entertainment. So you might be thinking of Lorenzo D. Bonaventura. He's the head of that. They produced the Matrix films, the Transformers films, Constantine, which is one of the inspirations of
El Paso.
El Paso Elsewhere. So lots of shared lineage and lots of real specialty in bringing really bold science fiction, fantasy, supernatural concepts to life.
Can you talk to what that, you're very early in the process. We know, Lakeith Stanfield is attached to star in the leading role in the film. Can you talk to what the process has been like, partnering with that studio on bringing El Paso Elsewhere to the big screen, and just have there been any surprises in the short time that you've been working on development for this film?
I can't talk too much about the film at this moment. I can clarify it's D. Bonaventura Pictures, not Entertainment. And yeah, I'd say the main thing is one of the main things that's different from games is Hollywood knows how to make a film. When a film doesn't get made for its timeline and its budget, when it's not a known element, basically, that's when something is seen to be going wrong. There are processes, there's times you bring people in. It is a pretty straight, discussed, and openly shared road that doesn't exist in games, and it just really struck me working more personally with the film process now. Oh, yeah, very, very literally. Other mediums have their issues, but the one thing that games does not consistently do is deliver a game. And it's something that we all as developers pay for, both logistically and existentially.
Interesting. Do you think that's something that can be adapted to the games industry, or do you think there's like a fundamental kind of, just with the nature of how games are made, it makes something like that much more difficult to implement, or potentially impossible?
It makes it harder to implement as far as an assembly line. There are people who've tried to do the assembly line of game development. I don't know if that is fully possible, except in its most cynical appearances. We've seen that with some mobile games, where it just is very literally plug in new assets on top of a foundation sometimes, and you put something out into the world. I think you'll never be able to have as clear of an assembly line as film, because film is operating with less variables. They don't have to worry about cross-platform multiplayer. It's just a movie.
Right.
But I do think the overall principles of having, if you've got a time and a budget and a thing that you're bringing to life, especially if you know what you're building and it's built based on any prior precedent, you can ship that thing. That it's okay. That's possible.
Yeah.
And I was told a lot early in my career, especially, that that's not possible. I was told you can't know what game you're making until you make it, which is fine as a philosophical concept. It does not keep you in business for very long, though.
Mm-hmm.
And it is creative and a business.
No, 100%. 100%. That's definitely a common factor that I've talked, that's come across in all my conversations, is that, you have to keep those two elements in mind consistently when developing. Okay, well, speaking to, the more assembly line games and, some of the bigger games in that kind of define the industry, I think we've seen a lot. And, part of the change that I have been seeing and has been coming faster and faster, at SGF this summer, Jeff went on stage and the first thing he presented was, he's like, here are the 10 top selling games on Steam this year. And they're games that, prior to their launch, very few people had heard of, but like Balatro, Helldivers 2, I know there were conversations going into Helldivers 2, which was a sequel to a very niche isometric game. No one really knew if it was going to pop off. And then, needless to say about where it is now, but at launch, it was massive, right? It's probably the biggest game of the year.
And it still has about as many players as Destiny on a given day. And a lot of people play Destiny.
Yeah. And that's the other thing is like, oh my God, if a game can't exist and sustain itself with 40,000 concurrents every day, no matter what, on the low end, how do you expect that model to like be sustainable? But that's a conversation for another time, and maybe someone from Bungie will come on here. But do you think that we're going to see more of that as AAA is kind of suffering a lot from overspending during COVID? Teams get growing beyond maybe where they needed to be. A lot of the fear and kind of these new tactics on how to like balance the sheets and stuff. There's a lot of factors that are making AAA development really scary. And what the future looks like, who knows? Do you think that we're going to continue to kind of regress and have more, AA indie titles, for lack of a better word, kind of take the forefront? Or do you think that AAA is going to bounce back and that it will continue to be the standard bearer, for the industry going forward?
I think we're going to see the thing that AA stepping into the place of AAA, because that's certainly what indie has done for AA, right? Now you have indie teams making big licensed games when previously THQ would make that. THQ had a legal department. They were publicly listed on the stock market. A team of 5 does not have those resources or that infrastructure, so we're already seeing, partially because of the necessities of the environment, but also because of amazing advances that have been made, a team of 5 being able to make a game that previously took a team of 20, 30 more.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that games, based off of my own personal observation and suspicions, I believe that games will continue to have the big outliers like Balatro or AAA games that pop off to an incredible degree, like Elden Ring and Hogwarts Legacy. The thing that stops us from, however, having, say, a AA revolution is that you have to have money. And so if the same people who could fund a AA revolution see another opportunity to take a Suicide Squad-sized bet, Warner Brothers came out after what happened with Suicide Squad and said they're going to double down on free-to-play title.
Right.
And this is while their biggest hits of recent years, things like Shadow of Mordor, things like Hogwarts Legacy, have been single-player titles. And it isn't just single-player, that's the definition point here, but it is the idea that everyone who wants who has the money to do a AA Revolution instead wants to make a new Fortnite, and that new Fortnite may get canceled before it ever gets released, is a reality we have to deal with right now. So
right.
I think we will continue to have amazing outliers like Balatro, and the biggest of the big also doing incredible things. And in the middle, that's where you historically have the biggest issue. So when Hollywood, which faced a similar issue, I think when you started getting towards the 50s and 60s,
you're right.
The studio system was crashing down. The idea of Hollywood epics where they would be filming on literally a studio city for months at a time with elephants living on the campus. When that crashed, you had the rise of the Hollywood New Wave. And that was small. I think you will have, because we have not had a distinct crash, we just have the highest highs and the lowest lows. We're going to continue to have the highest highs because people want to bet big.
Right.
And you will also have small entities outperforming. But in the middle, that crunch, those Strangers of Paradise sized games, those are the ones that are most likely to go extinct. And it's the... You saw Piranha Bytes, which was one of those standard bearers of that. They closed down this year. Right.
Yeah, I mean, I often think about the trajectory of gaming in relation to the trajectory of movies, and we've made multiple points in this conversation about how they're not one and the same. However, you look at the trajectory of movies, you talk about like the crash, the industry starting to crash in the 50s and 60s, new wave, new age. You get into the 70s. You get people like George Lucas on the scene, right, who make Star Wars, which is, for all intents and purposes, like a AA game, right? Like that, A New Hope is not Star Wars Outlaws, but that was able to sustain the industry for enough of the time for it to get back its footing, and then things like Star Wars were co-opted into the blockbuster, and then the movie blockbuster of the past is dwarfed by the movie blockbusters of the 80s. So that's something that I am very curious about, of like, oh, is this just like a temporary thing, and like actually Quadruple A will be a legitimate term in 10 years because it's going to come back stronger than ever? I don't know.
I mean, it already is. I mean, Fortnite is Quadruple A.
Sure.
The latest God of War and Last of Us games, when we're spending about the cost, including marketing, of a major, say, Marvel movie, and a major Marvel movie puts its product out within a year, 9 months, it takes a game that size about 8 years to germinate. When that is the case, when you've got 6-8 years between installments, it's it is close, but not it's close, but not the same, and it's one of the things that also does scare me about the future.
Yeah. Well, we are at time. Hopefully, we can pick up and continue having a great conversation at a later date. But I want to thank you so much for taking the time to be here on Hit the Limit Break. Before we go,
thank you for having me.
I do want you to give the opportunity to just promote what we've got coming up. I know Clickholding just came out. I Am Your Beast is right around the corner. Very excited for that. People go check that out. Go wishlist it on Steam. Any teasers for? I know you've got other things germinating, as you say. In the background. Is there any teasers for any other projects that you want to speak of right now? Any exclusives or anything we can share?
We have a co-op Kaiju horror game, which we've been starting to show little teases of. I've realized, so yes, Wishlist I Am Your Beast. Clickholding is available now. Just got played by Markiplier, which is huge and wild, considering when I was growing up, I used to see him. The thing that I would say is, as if we're talking about juicy exclusives, is I realized that as we're building this co-op Kaiju horror game, sometimes you whoopsie a little too close to the sun, and you go from making a fun adjacency to history to, or a little fantastical addition to history, to describing basically an entire alternate history. And what I realize is the lore and the elements of this game heavily suggest that the rise of Protestantism was not, in fact, Martin Luther and his 95 Theses or 96 Theses. We are, by virtue of the game we're building in the era in which it's set, which is the 1200s, late 1200s, early 1300s, suggesting that the rise of the Protestant movement was founded by kaiju fighting monks cooking in an abbey at a black lake at the edge of the world. So that's my latest existential terror.
We'll have to go back to the history books and just double check and see if that wasn't actually the case, because that seems a bit more logical.
New advances all the time.
Yeah, we're totally like uncovering things like, oh my god, like the 96 Theses were not what we thought they were about. Xalavier, thank you so much. Again, I'm gonna let you go, yeah, good luck with I Am Your Beast. Good luck with the continued sales of the other games, and I'm very excited to play this new title as well.